Hi guys, today I want to critique or evaluate a YouTuber's perception of Jordan Peterson's postmodernism claim about truth. Now his name is Cogent Canine. This guy is super smart in philosophy. He's got one of the best vocabularies in English. It's extremely clear, and most of his points are really quite valid about Jordan Peterson. His main issue is his religious preachings and his sort of unquestionable gathering of people that follow him without all the time, without much objection, basically. Although he could give him some support on some of the things that's happening in universities. We wouldn't have had Bill C-16 without Jordan Peterson, so at the same time, probably give him a bit of credit. Anyway, I want to talk about his claim about truth and how he defines it. Now, Jordan Peterson coincides morality and science together under one roof. If there's a placement of, let's say, or if there's a placement of one, and let's call them ways of knowing, then the other will have to respond and support each other in the goal of human survival. So if there's an issue in science, morality has to step in and say there's an issue with this scientific framework. If there's a problem in morality, science steps in and says there's an issue and this is how we can fix it. So they kind of respond to each other. It's the best way. And I want to give one example that I have. So we're going to talk about a hunter-gathering family, let's say 200,000 years ago, when there wasn't domesticated farming and everybody lived in pretty much absolute poverty and haven't experienced anything better than that. So all they're trying to do is maintain their human survival. Now they're going to follow two rules, which is family kinship, and they expect altruism from each member of this family. Let's say standard mother, father, son and daughter, and they have to work as altruistically and reciprocally to help survive as a team. It's kind of a collective work. But there's a morality issue where they're starving. So this is their issue. Who gets fed, the baby or the father first, or who does less work, who does more work, and these questions of morality. So science comes along and says, not science in itself, but science was already there, and it just had to be discovered. But science concerned with developing the tools that could help them alleviate this pain. So they can develop spears, knives, all these efficient tools, so efficient to them relative to the family in the sense that they can hunt quicker, easier, more efficiently, and survive and have a surplus of food. And science is now addressing a morality issue. So that's the first example. But Sam Harris and Cogent Canine don't agree with his definition of truth, for example. But it's slightly, to me, ironic that his definition of truth could help solve Sam Harris's issue with AI. So we've just given an example of science helping morality, but let's see it in reverse, or the converse. First, I wanted to show a quick video of. Oh shit! Sorry, that was not that. That was Richie Kotzen, really good guitarist. But yeah, let's put Jordan Peterson and him defining his definition of truth.
Thank you. As a follow-up question, so your conception of truth, as you said, is tailored to what helps us survive and live. Doesn't that also mean that your approach to the meaning of truth is of a postmodernist, which are a group of people you so clearly denounce?
That's a good.
There's one lame guy just clapping, like, you know. I'm sorry, but this one guy, like, what?
Question. It's wrong, but it's a good question. Well, look, you always have to give the devil his due. And there's a central postmodern claim which arises from a very complex conundrum. And the conundrum is one that emerged in domains outside of the humanities, let's say. Although it emerged in the domain of literary criticism, because what happened in the mid-60s was that a very large number of disciplines simultaneously realized that it was actually technically impossible to perceive the world because there was an infinite number of ways that you could perceive the world. And so that bedeviled artificial intelligence. I mean, people thought for a long time that it would be easy to build machines that could see the world because there was the world and there were the objects, and figuring out what the objects were wasn't hard. It was maneuvering in the world that was hard. But that turned out to be wrong. It's really, really hard to figure out what the objects are, and we actually don't know how we do it. Now, 50 years later, we have machines that can orient themselves pretty decently in the world, but they really had to be built in embodied form, and I won't pursue that. At the same time, psychologists who were working on perception ran into exactly the same conundrum because they figured out that they couldn't figure out how we could see things, and we're still sorting that out. And the literary critics figured out that there was no obvious canonical interpretation for a piece of literature. And that raised a specter, which was, well, if there's no obvious canonical interpretation, how do you know that one interpretation is better than the other? So out of that arose the postmodern notion that there's no grand narrative. There's no justifiable grand narrative. There's an infinite number of ways of interpreting the world, and there's no grand narrative. Fair enough. But, well, that raises the problem of value. Like, if there's no grand narrative, how do you orient yourself in the world? And the postmodern answer to that was, well, let's forget about the complexity of that problem and sneak our closet Marxism back into the game. And that was completely intellectually, I mean, I've been accused of failing to notice that there's a contradiction between postmodernism and Marxism. It's not like I failed to notice that. It's obvious that there's a contradiction, but it's equally obvious that the postmodernists, broadly speaking, is a thumbnail sketch, because they can't solve the problem of how to orient yourself in the world if there's an infinite number of interpretations.
He's completely right here. If you have an infinite number of interpretations, subjective interpretations of equal value, you can't orient yourself and you can't decide which ideas are better than others. So he's correct on the postmodernism claim. His definition is... I don't think he redefines what he means by truth here. I think he's just saying the relationship between his claim and postmodernism and why it's not a clear link. But I'll probably go in another video explaining, is this claim a postmodernism claim or not? But for this, let's stay with morality and science and why his definition solves Sam Harris's issue with AI and losing control over it. And I've got another video here. Skip. Also, I apologise for the awful audio. I actually really need to buy a microphone at some point.
Emotional response to the dangers that lie ahead. I'm unable to marshal this response, and I'm giving this talk. The point is, something would have to destroy civilization as we know it. You have to imagine how bad it would have to be to prevent us from making improvements in our technology permanently, generation after generation. Almost by definition, this is the worst thing that's ever happened in human history. So the only alternative, and this is what lies behind door number 2, is that we continue to improve our intelligent machines year after year after year. And at a certain point, we will build machines that are smarter than we are. And once we have machines that are smarter than we are, they will begin to improve themselves. And then we risk what the mathematician I.J. Good called an intelligence explosion. that the process could get away from us. Now, this is often caricatured, as I have here, as a fear that armies of malicious robots will attack us. But that isn't the most likely scenario. It's not that our machines will become spontaneously malevolent. The concern is really that we will build machines that are so much more competent than we are that the slightest divergence between their goals and our own could destroy us. Just think about how we relate to ants. Okay, we don't hate them. We don't go out of our way to harm them. In fact, sometimes we take pains not to harm them. We step over them on the sidewalk. But whenever their presence seriously conflicts with one of our goals, let's say when constructing a building like this one, we annihilate them without a qualm. Okay, the concern is that we will one day build machines that, whether they're conscious or not, could treat us with similar disregard. Now, I suspect this seems far-fetched to many of you.
So, he has an issue with the development and the current rate of development of AI, and about how the explosion of artificial intelligence could actually be our self-destruction, basically. That they're going to be so more competent than we are, but maybe they decide that we are too inefficient for the world. But if you think about it, if he coincided morality and science together, he wouldn't have this issue, in my opinion. So let's take the AI in all the voice simulation that we can now do in technology. So we can copy anyone's voice and replicate it to near perfection. An example of this is in the UK, Boris Johnson had a phone call from an alleged Russian representative and said, "I'll pass you to Vladimir Putin," and they spoke. But this wasn't Vladimir Putin, it was a copy of his voice that someone has managed to simulate, that Boris Johnson was convinced enough that it was him. Or the fact that we can copy other people's facial depiction in videos without actually being the person. Now, this doesn't help human survival. It serves no purpose except destruction and malicious incentives. It can serve no purpose. So if we took Jordan Peterson's view on truth about helping humanity to survive, we wouldn't need this, and therefore it would not be created for the destruction of, or the potential destruction of humanity. So I think this could be Sam Harrison's solution to AI. So I think I'll just wrap up there. But anyway, give me feedback on this. Cogent Canine, give a response if you want. But many thanks, guys, and I'll speak soon.